Next, I want to talk about the Effects tab. So let's go and click on the lowercase f and x. Now, in here, we have the option now to add grain. We also have the option to do some post-crop vignetting, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to talk about adding grain first. First of all, what I think I want to do is go into 100% view, and then I'm going to just drag this over so I can actually get my familiar view at 100% view in the window here. Now, the reason why Adobe has added the option to add some grain into your images is because a lot of photographers, old dogs like me from the film days, are saying that our images are too synthetic. There's no realism. For decades and decades, we always had grain in our images. Obviously, the higher the ISO, the larger, more prominent the grain was, the lower the ISO, the cleaner it was. But there was always some amount of grain in our images unless we got to an ISO below 50 or 25. So here we go. We can actually add some grain in here. So I'm going to add some grain. I'm up to 20. Notice that as soon as I move the slider from 0, we get size and roughness. The size is set to about 1/4 of the length of the slider, and the roughness is set right in the middle. I'm just going to raise this up so you can actually see the noise that we can actually put in our image. Now, obviously, I'm going a little bit overboard on this, but you get the idea at this point. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop this down to 20, 10, 0. So now it actually has no size, but it's still showing up. Isn't that bizarre? What if I come in here and drop that down to roughness, and now it's just a bunch of hoogly-poog. All right, let's go back up to 50, and then come into here and set the size. All right, I'm going to put the size up to 100. You can see the grain has gotten really over the top. The roughness here is set to that. If I take the roughness off, you got these round little things going on here. Actually, this is starting to look like reticulation. So if you've ever processed any film in your life, you'll know what I'm talking about with that. And if I take the roughness up this way, you can see how we've got an increased amount of roughness. If I put it back at the default, the size value here is ridiculous. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to possibly take this down to a size of 20 or 30, and then obviously take the amount down as well. So I'm at 30, 30, and 50. If I click on the before and after, you can see that we've added some noise in there. I think I may go down to 20 and 20, and then click on the before and after just so I can see that I've actually added some noise in here. Whether these values are right or wrong at this point in time, this is an option for you to add noise to your image. The next thing I want to talk about is the post-crop vignetting. If we had done our vignetting in the previous tab where we darkened the corners as an example, and then I decided later on to crop my image like this, I would be cropping out the vignetting. But if I use the post-crop vignetting option here, then the vignetting would follow the crop. And I think that's really, really important. I don't even know why it's, well, unless you're not cropping it, whatever, doesn't matter. We have highlight priority, color priority, and paint priority as far as how we're affecting and working with this. So if I was to bring in, as an example, this much of this value here. I'm just going to take it up to 40 just so I'm sticking with numbers that work. The midpoint is now set to 50, and if I were to do this to my midpoint, now you can see that it's just the center area that's being highlighted, and if I do this, you can see how I'm pushing it out. All right, so that's that. The roundness deals with, obviously, how round this is, and you can see how I've pushed things out and have that going that way. And then if I do it this way, then it's not so round and whatever. Let's just set that to 0 and move on. Feathering value is kind of interesting. There you go, no feather value whatsoever. Nice, tight thing. Move my midpoint this way. I've expanded it out, move it in this way. I've contracted it in. Now I can actually start to play with my feather value so I can actually see what's going on. If I do this, and do that, and then I can play with my roundness. You can actually see how the rounding actually works. It's almost a circle there, isn't it? So there you go. And now you can play with your highlights, and it's going to try to allow the highlights to come through your vignetting. I should actually put a little bit of a feather value on that guy as well, so it's not as obvious what we're doing. And if I come in here and turn that off and turn it on, we've got some kind of vignetting going on and all that kind of stuff. Like I say, I'm not a big fan of that, but I'm just going to leave everything the way they are. That's your highlight priority. If I come in here and do color priority, I end up with something like this. And then if I come into paint overlay, your image is going to look like crap. Paint overlay was the first option that we had as far as post-crop vignetting was concerned, and then with a little more math and all that kind of stuff, we end up with some of these other ones. Highlight priority seems to work well. I just don't like using this feature at all. So I'm just going to set that back to 0 and say it's up to you whether or not you want to have any of these effects. The only effect I would possibly add would be some grain in my image, but I would rather do the grain adding, if I found it necessary, in Photoshop, only because I have more control of where that grain is going in the tonal range of my image. Next, we're going to talk about the camera calibration. I'm just going to recap because I'm going to recap it right here, right now. All right, don't forget to make sure that you have your camera standard at a minimum when you're coming through here, and then use the 2012 process. Don't forget the 2012 gives us, I'm just going to come over to the linear thing here. That's what 2012 would give us. If we were back over here and chose the 2010, you can see there's a difference, and by default we have that curve. Make sure that you have the appropriate curve chosen, or the process. What I'm trying to get across is we're not even going to bother with this tab. Now that I've shown you how to manipulate grain and add a post-crop vignette, what I need to do is move on to the next tabs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to the presets.